The dust kicked up in angry clouds as Zelda Sutherland's bare feet pounded against the hard, packed earth of the town square, her lungs burning with every desperate breath, while the jeering crowd roared around her like a living beast hungry for spectacle and shame. It was the summer of 1873 in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and the frontier town had gathered to witness something rare and controversial: a woman running for her freedom against the man who claimed to own her debt. 3 months earlier, Zelda had arrived in Council Bluffs with nothing but the clothes on her back and a letter of introduction to a seamstress who had promised her work. The letter turned out to be worthless, the seamstress having died of fever the previous winter, and Zelda found herself stranded in a town where respectable work for a woman alone was scarce as rain in August. She had taken a room at the boarding house run by Marcus Tillman, a man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them, promising to pay him back as soon as she found employment. That employment never materialized the way she hoped. The general store did not need help, the hotel had a full staff, and the restaurant owner took one look at her threadbare dress and turned her away. Weeks turned into months, and Tillman's patience wore thin as his ledger filled with her unpaid debt. When she could not produce the $40 she owed him, he presented her with a contract, one that would bind her to work in his saloon for 2 years to settle what she owed plus interest. Zelda refused to sign. She knew what working in Tillman's saloon meant for women, knew the expectation went far beyond serving drinks and dealing cards. The argument that followed brought half the town to witness it, and in his fury, Tillman had declared that if she thought herself so high and mighty, she could prove her worth another way. He was known throughout Council Bluffs as the fastest runner in 3 counties, having won every foot race at the annual summer festival for 5 years straight. He proposed a race, her freedom against her debt. If she won, he would forgive everything she owed and she could leave Council Bluffs with a clear conscience. If she lost, she would sign his contract without further protest. The whole town knew it was impossible. Tillman was tall and long-legged, built like a greyhound, while Zelda was average height with a frame worn thin by hunger and worry. But she had accepted anyway, because the alternative was worse than any loss could ever be. Now she ran with everything she had, her simple cotton dress hiked up scandalously to her knees, her dark hair streaming behind her from its pins. The course was a circuit around the town square, twice around for a total distance of roughly half a mile. Tillman ran beside her, not even breathing hard, his face split in a confident grin. He was toying with her, she realized, letting her think she had a chance before he would surge ahead and crush her hopes entirely. The crowd was a blur of faces, some sympathetic, most merely entertained by the unusual spectacle. Zelda's vision started to narrow, black spots dancing at the edges as her body screamed for her to stop. Her feet were bleeding, she could feel the warm stickiness between her toes, but she pushed harder. She had grown up in Ohio, the youngest of 6 children, and her brothers had never let her win at anything. She had learned to run fast and fight dirty just to keep up, and though years of hardship had weakened her body, they had not broken her spirit. They rounded the second corner of the first lap, and Tillman finally made his move, lengthening his stride to pull ahead. The crowd roared its approval, and Zelda felt despair rising in her throat like bile. Then, cutting through the noise, she heard a single voice. "Do not quit now." She could not see who had shouted, but the words struck something deep inside her. Her father had said the same thing to her once, when she was 12, and trying to learn to swim in the creek behind their farm. She had been ready to give up, convinced she would drown, but he had stood on the bank and called out those exact words, "Do not quit now." She had not quit then, and she would not quit now. Zelda dug deeper than she knew she could, finding some reserve of strength she had not known existed. Her legs pumped harder, her arms swung with renewed vigor, and slowly, impossibly, she began to close the gap. Tillman glanced back, his expression shifting from confidence to surprise to something darker. He pushed harder, but months of good living and whiskey had softened him more than he realized. Zelda was hungry and desperation made her faster than fear ever could. They came around the final turn of the first lap neck and neck, and the crowd's roar changed in pitch, surprise mixing with excitement. Money was changing hands as men revised their bets on the fly. Zelda's lungs felt like they were filled with fire, every breath a knife to her ribs, but she kept pace with Tillman stride for stride. The second lap was agony. Her legs trembled with every impact, her feet left bloody prints in the dust, and her vision swam with exhaustion. But Tillman was suffering too. She could hear it in his ragged breathing, see it in the way his form had deteriorated from smooth efficiency to desperate flailing. They were both running on will alone now, and Zelda's will had been forged in harder fires than his ever had. With 50 yards to go, Zelda pulled ahead by half a step. The crowd was screaming now, a wall of sound that seemed to physically push her forward. Tillman lunged, trying to grab her arm, but she twisted away, and the momentum of his failed attempt sent him stumbling. She pulled ahead by a full step, then 2, then 3. The finish line was a rope stretched across the square, held by the blacksmith on one side and the banker on the other. Zelda threw herself at it with the last shred of strength in her body, breaking through in a stumbling run that carried her another 10 feet before her legs finally gave out entirely. She collapsed to her hands and knees in the dirt, gasping for air, barely aware of the chaos erupting around her. She had won. The realization took several moments to penetrate the fog of exhaustion clouding her mind. She had actually won. She was free. The debt was forgiven. She could leave this town and never look back. Hands helped her to her feet, voices congratulated her, and someone pressed a dipper of water into her shaking hands. She drank greedily, the cool liquid the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. When her vision finally cleared, she found herself surrounded by townspeople, their faces a mix of amazement and approval. Even those who had bet against her seemed impressed by what they had witnessed. Tillman was nowhere to be seen. Someone said he had stormed off immediately after losing, his face purple with rage and humiliation. The banker, a portly man named Henderson, officially declared the debt forgiven and had her mark an X on a document stating as much. She could barely hold the pen. Her hands were shaking so badly. "You have got sand, girl," Henderson said, his eyes twinkling. "I have not seen a race like that in 30 years. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with excitement over the upset they had witnessed, a man approached her. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of summer sky. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, dusty denim trousers, a simple cotton shirt, scuffed boots, and a hat that had seen better days. But there was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with swagger, that made her notice him even through her exhaustion. "That was the bravest thing I have seen in a long time," he said, his voice deep and warm with a hint of Texas drawl. "I am Jackson Hayes. I own a ranch about 10 miles north of here." Zelda tried to straighten up, aware of how she must look with her dress filthy and torn, her hair a wild tangle, her feet bleeding through the dust caked on them. "Zelda Sutherland. And thank you, but I think it was more desperation than bravery." "Sometimes they are the same thing," Jackson said, He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. "For your feet. You should get those looked at." She accepted the cloth gratefully, too tired to protest the charity. "I will, once I figure out where I am going to go now. You do not have family here." "I do not have family anywhere. Not anymore." The words came out more bitter than she intended. Her parents had died in a fire 5 years ago, her siblings scattered to the winds seeking their own fortunes. She had not heard from any of them in over a year. Jackson was quiet for a moment, studying her with those blue eyes. "Can you cook?" The question was so unexpected that Zelda laughed, a sound that came out more like a cough. "Yes, I can cook. And sew, and clean, and do laundry, and mend fences if I must. My ranch cook left 3 weeks ago to get married and move to California. I have been trying to make do on my own, but I am burning more meals than I am eating, and my ranch hands are threatening mutiny. I need someone who can feed 15 hungry men 3 times a day. The pay is $20 a month plus room and board. It is hard work, but it is honest work." Zelda stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You are offering me a job right now. You do not even know me." "I know you just outran Marcus Tillman against impossible odds rather than accept a fate worse than death. I know you are willing to work hard and that you do not give up when things get tough. That tells me more than any letter of reference ever could." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face from handsome to something approaching beautiful. "Besides, anyone who can run like that despite having no proper shoes can probably handle anything my ranch throws at them." She wanted to accept immediately, but years of hard lessons made her cautious. "Why are you doing this? What do you really want?" Jackson's smile faded, but his eyes remained kind. "I am doing this because I need a cook and you need a job. Nothing more, nothing less. You would have your own cabin near the main house, completely separate. My ranch hands are good men, but if any of them bother you, you come tell me and I will handle it. This is a job offer, Miss Sutherland, not anything else. I give you my word on that." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that cut through her defenses. She had learned to read people in her months of hardship, learned to spot the liars and the predators. Jackson Hayes did not feel like either of those. He felt like exactly what he claimed to be, a rancher in need of a cook who happened to be in the right place at the right time. "When would you need me to start?" she asked. "How about you take a few days to rest and heal up? Come out to the ranch on Monday if you are still interested. The Hayes Ranch. Anyone in town can give you directions. If you decide it is not for you, no hard feelings." He tipped his hat to her. "Think about it, Miss Sutherland. You just won your freedom in a foot race, but freedom does not mean much when you are alone and hungry. Come run toward something better instead of just running away." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Zelda standing in the middle of the town square with her mind reeling. She watched him mount a patient bay horse and ride out of town, his posture easy and relaxed in the saddle. The next 3 days were a blur of recovery. The doctor, a kind older man named Patterson, cleaned and bandaged her feet at no charge, declaring that he had won $5 betting on her, and it was the least he could do. The owner of the boarding house, a widow named Mrs. Chen, offered her a room for free for the rest of the week, having also profited from the unexpected outcome of the race. Zelda slept for nearly 20 hours straight, her body finally able to rest now that the crushing weight of debt and fear had been lifted. When she finally woke, her feet were still tender but healing, and her mind was clear for the first time in months. She spent the next 2 days asking subtle questions about Jackson Hayes around town, and everything she learned made her trust his offer more. He was well respected, known for treating his workers fairly and paying on time. He had inherited the ranch from his father 5 years ago, and had built it into one of the most successful operations in the county through hard work and smart management. No one had a bad word to say about him, except that he worked too hard and should take more time for himself. On Monday morning, Zelda borrowed a horse from Mrs. Chen, who seemed to have decided to adopt her as a project, and rode north out of Council Bluffs, following the directions she had been given. The summer morning was beautiful, the sky a brilliant blue with just a few wispy clouds, and the prairie stretched out in rolling waves of grass that rippled in the wind like a golden ocean. It had been so long since Zelda had allowed herself to notice beauty that the sight almost brought tears to her eyes. The Hayes Ranch was larger than she had expected, with a good-sized main house, several outbuildings, extensive corrals, and what looked like at least 200 head of cattle grazing in the distance. As she approached, she saw Jackson working with a horse in one of the corrals, his movements patient and gentle as he guided the young animal through what appeared to be basic training. He looked up as she approached and broke into a smile that made her heart do an unexpected flip in her chest. "Miss Sutherland, I was hoping you would come. You made it sound like a good opportunity," she said, dismounting carefully. Her feet were still tender, but the doctor had assured her they would be fully healed within another week. "I would be a fool not to at least see what you are offering. Let me show you around." The tour took nearly an hour. The ranch was well maintained and organized, with everything in its place and a sense of purpose to the whole operation. The cabin he showed her was small but solid, with a real bed, a stove for heat, and even a small table with 2 chairs. It was simple, but after months of uncertainty and fear, it looked like paradise to Zelda. The kitchen where she would work was attached to the main house, a large room with a massive cast iron stove, plenty of counter space, and shelves stocked with basics like flour, salt, sugar, and dried beans. A pantry held preserved vegetables and fruits, and a well-stocked smokehouse stood just outside the back door. "I brought in supplies just last week," Jackson explained. "So you should have everything you need to start. Breakfast is at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. The hands are not picky, they just want food that does not taste like charcoal. Can you handle that?" "I can handle that," Zelda said with more confidence than she felt. Cooking for 15 people was different from cooking for a family, but the fundamentals were the same. Make plenty, keep it simple, and do not let anything burn. "Then welcome to the Hayes Ranch, Miss Sutherland. I am glad to have you here." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Zelda shook it. His grip was firm and warm, calloused from hard work but gentle in its pressure. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection she could not quite name but could definitely feel. From the way Jackson's eyes widened slightly, she thought he might have felt it too. The first week was harder than Zelda had expected. Cooking for 15 hungry ranch hands who worked from sunup to sundown required planning, timing, and stamina she was not sure she possessed. She woke at 4:30 every morning to get the stove going and start breakfast, usually biscuits, bacon, eggs when they had them, and endless pots of strong coffee. Lunch was often stew or beans with cornbread, something that could simmer while she prepared for dinner. Dinner was the big meal, usually meat with potatoes or rice, more vegetables, more bread, and pie or cake when she had time. The hands were respectful but reserved, clearly waiting to see if she would last before they invested any energy in getting to know her. Jackson ate with them, sitting at the long table in the dining hall attached to the kitchen, but he was quiet during meals, focused on his food and whatever problems needed solving that day. By the end of the first week, Zelda was exhausted but proud. She had not burned anything. No one had complained, and several of the hands had actually complimented her biscuits. It was more approval than she had received in months, and it felt good in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. On Sunday, her day off, Jackson knocked on her cabin door in the late morning. She opened it to find him standing there with a basket covered with a cloth. "I thought you might like a break from cooking," he said, looking almost shy. "I packed some lunch. There is a spot by the creek that is real pretty this time of year. If you would like some company, that is. If not, you can have the basket anyway." Zelda's first instinct was to say no, to protect herself from potential disappointment or danger. But Jackson had been nothing but kind and respectful all week, and she found herself wanting to spend time with him outside the structured environment of work. "A picnic sounds nice," she said. "Let me get my bonnet." They walked together across the property, following a well-worn path that led down a gentle slope toward the sound of running water. The creek was lovely, shaded by cottonwood trees and lined with smooth rocks perfect for sitting. Jackson spread a blanket he had brought and unpacked the basket, revealing fried chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and even a small jar of pickles. "Where did all this come from?" Zelda asked, accepting the plate he handed her. "I rode into town yesterday and convinced Mrs. Chen to pack it for me," Jackson admitted. "I wanted to do something nice for you after your first week. I know it could not have been easy, jumping into a job like that with no real preparation." "It was not easy," Zelda agreed, biting into a piece of chicken that was perfectly seasoned and cooked. "But it was good. It felt good to be useful again, to be earning my own way instead of sinking deeper into debt and desperation." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of the creek providing a peaceful backdrop. A breeze rustled the cottonwood leaves above them, dappling them with moving shadows. It was, Zelda realized, the most relaxed she had felt in years. "Can I ask you something?" Jackson said finally. "You can ask. I might not answer, but you can ask. What brought you to Council Bluffs in the first place? You said you do not have family, but you must have come from somewhere." Zelda was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to share. "I came from Ohio originally, small farm outside of Columbus. When my parents died, the farm went to my oldest brother, and there was not much left for the rest of us. My sisters married. My younger brothers went west to try their luck in the mines. I tried to make it work in Columbus, but work for a woman alone is scarce unless you want to work in a factory or worse. I heard there were opportunities out here on the frontier, so I saved every penny I could and bought a train ticket west. That took courage." "It took desperation," Zelda corrected. "Just like the Footrace, I seem to do my best when I have no other choice." Jackson smiled at that. "Maybe, or maybe you are braver than you think you are. Not everyone would have taken that train. Not everyone would have raced Tillman. You keep choosing to fight instead of giving up. That is bravery, whether you call it that or not." The words warmed something inside Zelda that had been cold for a long time. "What about you? Have you always been a rancher?" "I grew up on this ranch. My father built it from nothing. Just him and 100 head of cattle he drove up from Texas after the war. I am from Texas originally, but I was only 4 when we moved here, so I barely remember it. My father taught me everything about ranching, and when he died 5 years ago, he left it all to me. My mother had already passed by then, so it was just me." "Do you have siblings?" "Had a brother. He died at Shiloh during the war." Jackson's voice was matter of fact, but Zelda could hear the old grief beneath it. "He was only 19. My father never really recovered from losing him. I think he worked himself to death trying to make the ranch successful enough to honor David's memory." "I am sorry," Zelda said quietly. "It was a long time ago." Jackson looked out at the creek, his expression distant. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if the war had never happened, if David had lived and come home. But there is no point in wondering. You can only work with what is, not what might have been. They talked for hours that afternoon, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Jackson told her about the challenges of running a ranch, the constant battle against weather and market prices and cattle thieves. Zelda told him about learning to cook from her mother, about the small joys of her childhood before everything fell apart. She found herself laughing at his stories about stubborn cattle and incompetent cowhands, and he seemed genuinely interested in her opinions about everything from politics to the best way to make pie crust. When the sun started to sink toward the horizon, they packed up the remains of the picnic and walked back to the ranch together. At the door to her cabin, Jackson paused. "I really enjoyed today," he said. "Would you want to do this again sometime? Maybe next Sunday?" Zelda's heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. "I would like that." His smile was like sunrise. "Good. That is real good." The next few weeks fell into a pleasant rhythm. Zelda cooked, and she got better at it with each passing day, learning the preferences of the different hands and timing her meals to perfection. The men started to warm up to her, offering greetings and small talk, treating her with a respect that she had rarely experienced. Jackson was a constant presence, always nearby if she needed anything, but never intrusive or demanding. And every Sunday, they had their picnic by the creek. Sometimes Jackson brought food from town. Sometimes Zelda cooked something special, and once they just brought bread and cheese and apples and called it good enough. The food was almost beside the point anyway. What mattered were the conversations, the slow building of trust and understanding between them. Zelda found herself looking forward to Sundays with an intensity that surprised her. She would catch herself thinking about Jackson during the week, wondering what he was doing, if he was thinking about her too. She noticed small things about him, the way he pushed his hair back when he was concentrating, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the gentleness of his hands when he worked with the animals. She was falling in love with him. She realized one night as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling of her cabin. The realization should have terrified her, should have sent her running, but instead it felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in years. What she did not know was whether Jackson felt the same way. He was always kind and attentive, but he never crossed any lines, never said or did anything that could be construed as improper. Sometimes, she caught him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something soft and wondering, but he always looked away when she noticed. The answer came in early September, almost 3 months after she had first arrived at the ranch. They were sitting by the creek on a Sunday afternoon, the weather just starting to hint at the coming fall with a cool breeze and leaves beginning to turn gold. Jackson had been quieter than usual, distracted by something he would not name. Finally, he set down his coffee and turned to face her directly. "Zelda, I need to tell you something." Her heart jumped into her throat. "All right. I have been trying to figure out how to say this for weeks now. I do not want to make you uncomfortable, and I do not want you to feel like your job is at risk if you do not feel the same way, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore." He took a deep breath. "I am in love with you. I think I have been since the day I saw you run that race, all courage and determination and refusing to give up. These past few months have been the happiest of my life, and it is because of you. Not just because you are a great cook, though you are, but because you make everything better just by being here." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Jackson, Wait, let me finish," he said quickly. "I know we have not known each other that long. I know you have been through a lot and maybe you are not ready for this. But I need you to know how I feel. And I want you to know that even if you do not feel the same way, your job is safe. You can stay here as long as you want, and I will never mention this again if that is what you want. But I had to tell you, I had to be honest. Are you finished? Zelda asked, unable to keep the smile off her face. Jackson blinked. Yes. Good, because I love you too, you complete fool. I have loved you for weeks now, and I have been driving myself crazy wondering if you felt the same way or if I was just another employee to you. The expression on Jackson's face was almost comical in its shock. You do. I do, Zelda confirmed, and then she was laughing through her tears. I love you, Jackson Hayes. You took a chance on me when no one else would. You have been kind and patient and respectful, and you make me feel safe in a way I have not felt since I was a child. Of course I love you. Jackson moved then, closing the distance between them and cupping her face in his hands. Can I kiss you? You better, Zelda said, and then his lips were on hers and the world fell away. The kiss was sweet and tender, full of promise and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. I want to marry you, he said. Not right away if you are not ready, but someday. I want you to be my wife, my partner. I want to build a life with you here on this ranch. Will you think about it? I do not need to think about it, Zelda said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Yes, yes, I will marry you. Jackson pulled back to look at her, his eyes wide. Are you sure? We can take more time if you need it, I am sure. I have spent too much of my life being uncertain, being afraid to take chances. You asked me to run toward something better, remember? Well, that is what I am doing. I am running toward a life with you, toward happiness, toward home. Yes, Jackson, my answer is yes. He kissed her again, longer this time, and when they finally broke apart, they were both grinning like fools. They decided to wait until October to get married, giving themselves time to plan and for Zelda to make herself a proper dress. The announcement was met with approval from the ranch hands, who had apparently been taking bets on when Jackson would finally work up the courage to propose. Mrs. Chen, when they rode into Council Bluffs to tell her, actually cried with happiness and immediately began planning a reception to be held at her boarding house. The month between the proposal and the wedding was busy and joyful. Zelda spent her spare time sewing her dress, a simple but beautiful creation of cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Jackson ordered a new suit from the tailor in town and spent his free time making improvements to the main house, preparing for Zelda to move in after the wedding. They stole moments together when they could, kisses behind the barn and long conversations about their future. They talked about everything, from how many children they wanted to where they should expand the ranch to what they would name their first horse together. Zelda felt like she was living in a dream, afraid she would wake up and find herself back in that boarding house, drowning in debt and despair. But it was not a dream. It was real as the calloused hand holding hers, as real as the kiss pressed to her forehead, as real as the love shining in Jackson's eyes every time he looked at her. The wedding took place on a perfect October afternoon, the sky a brilliant blue and the air crisp with the promise of winter. The ceremony was held at the small church in Council Bluffs, with what seemed like half the town in attendance. Zelda walked down the aisle on the arm of the blacksmith, who had volunteered to give her away when he learned she had no family present. She barely saw the assembled guests, her eyes locked on Jackson standing at the altar in his new suit, looking more handsome than should be legal. The minister, a jovial man named Reverend Thompson, kept the ceremony short and sweet. When he pronounced them man and wife and told Jackson he could kiss his bride, the cheer that went up from the assembled crowd rattled the church windows. The reception at Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a raucous affair, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Zelda danced until her feet hurt, but this time the pain was from joy instead of desperation. Jackson held her close for every slow dance, whispering promises and sweet words into her ear that made her blush and laugh. As the sun set, and the party showed no signs of slowing down, Jackson leaned down and whispered, "Want to escape?" "Absolutely," Zelda whispered back. They slipped out the back door while everyone was distracted by a particularly enthusiastic fiddle solo, sneaking to where Jackson had tied their horses. They rode back to the ranch together under a sky full of stars, their laughter echoing across the prairie. The main house felt different now that it was officially theirs together. Jackson carried Zelda over the threshold, making her shriek with surprised laughter, and then they were alone in the bedroom he had prepared for them. A fire crackled in the fireplace, warming the room against the October chill. Candles had been lit, casting a soft glow over everything. "Are you happy?" Jackson asked, his hands gentle on her waist. "I am happier than I ever thought I could be," Zelda answered honestly. 6 months ago I was drowning and I did not think I would survive. Now I have a home, a husband, and a future. It feels like a miracle." "You made your own miracle," Jackson said. "You chose to run instead of giving up. You chose to take a chance on me and this ranch. You chose happiness." "That takes more strength than most people ever find." "We chose each other," Zelda corrected, reaching up to cup his face. "And I choose you again right now, and I will choose you every day for the rest of my life." They made love that night with tenderness and care, learning each other's bodies with patience and growing confidence. Zelda had been nervous, her experience limited to vague warnings and euphemistic advice, but Jackson was gentle and attentive, making sure she was comfortable and ready before proceeding. By the time they finally came together completely, she was gasping his name and digging her fingers into his shoulders, pleasure washing over her in waves she had not known were possible. Afterwards, they lay tangled together under the quilts, Jackson's arm around her waist and Zelda's head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, and she felt utterly safe in a way she had never experienced before. "I love you," Jackson murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you too," Zelda whispered back. "Forever." Life as Mrs. Jackson Hayes was different from anything Zelda had experienced before. She was no longer just the cook, but the lady of the house, Jackson's partner in running the ranch. It was a learning curve, figuring out how to manage not just meals but household accounts, supplies, and the occasional need to handle ranch business when Jackson was away dealing with cattle or horses. But she loved it. She loved the work, the challenge, the sense of purpose. She loved waking up next to Jackson every morning, loved the way he kissed her goodbye before heading out for the day, loved the conversations they had over dinner about everything and nothing. She loved being part of something larger than herself, part of a working ranch that fed and employed people, part of a community that had welcomed her despite her rocky start. The first winter of their marriage was hard, as all frontier winters were. The temperatures dropped below zero, snow piled up in drifts higher than her head, and keeping the animals fed and healthy was a daily battle. But they faced it together, Jackson and Zelda and the loyal ranch hands, and they all came through it tired but intact. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves and foals and the return of green grass to the prairie. It also brought a realization for Zelda that changed everything. She was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, her monthly cycle late and her body feeling different in subtle ways. But when Dr. Patterson confirmed it during a visit to town in April, the reality hit her like a physical force. She was going to have a baby. She and Jackson were going to be parents. She told him that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, something they had made a habit of doing when the weather allowed. Jackson had his arm around her shoulders, and she was leaning into his warmth, gathering her courage. "Jackson, I have something to tell you." "That sounds serious," he said, but his tone was light. "Should I be worried?" "No, not worried, but it is big news." She took a breath and turned to face him. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." Jackson's expression went through several rapid changes, shock to disbelief to pure joy. "Really? Are you sure?" Dr. Patterson confirmed it this afternoon. He thinks the baby will come in late November or early December. Jackson let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral and swept Zelda up in his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he finally set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "We are going to be parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are going to be a mother and I am going to be a father. I cannot believe it." "Believe it," Zelda said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "In about 7 months, there is going to be a tiny person in this house demanding all of our attention." "I cannot wait," Jackson said, and kissed her with such tenderness that Zelda felt tears spill down her cheeks. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, much to everyone's relief. Zelda continued to cook and manage the house, though Jackson and the hands all conspired to make sure she did not overdo it. By midsummer, her belly was round and obvious, and she felt the baby moving inside her, little flutters that grew into definite kicks as the months passed. Jackson was attentive to the point of being comical, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if she should be resting. Zelda found it endearing even when it was annoying, a sign of how much he loved her and their coming child. In October, they celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them. Zelda was hugely pregnant by then, moving slowly and unable to see her own feet, but she felt beautiful when she saw the way Jackson looked at her. "1 year ago, I married the bravest, most beautiful woman in the world," Jackson said, raising his glass of cider in a toast. "And every day since has been better than the last. I cannot wait to see what the next year brings." "A lot of sleepless nights and dirty diapers, probably," Zelda said with a laugh. "But I cannot wait either. Thank you for running after me, Jackson. Thank you for asking me to run home with you." "Thank you for saying yes," Jackson replied. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda Hayes. You and this baby and this life we are building together. I love you more than I can say." "I love you too," Zelda said, "more than I ever thought I could love anyone." Their daughter was born on a snowy December evening, arriving early and in a hurry just like her mother. The labor was hard but relatively quick, and when Dr. Patterson finally placed the squalling infant in Zelda's arms, she felt a rush of love so intense it almost hurt. "She is perfect," Jackson whispered, tears running unashamedly down his face as he looked at his daughter. "She is absolutely perfect." They named her Rose after Jackson's mother, and she was indeed perfect. Tiny and red-faced and loud, with a surprising amount of dark hair and her father's blue eyes. Zelda could barely take her eyes off her, amazed that she and Jackson had created this tiny miracle. The first few months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming and wonderful all at once. Rose had strong opinions about when she wanted to eat, which was frequently, and she did not sleep for more than 2 hours at a stretch. But Jackson was a devoted father, walking the floor with her in the middle of the night so Zelda could rest, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his daughter with such open adoration that it made Zelda fall in love with him all over again. By the time Rose was 6 months old, life had settled into a new rhythm. Zelda had figured out how to balance motherhood with her household duties, though she had hired a young woman from town to help with the cooking a few days a week. Jackson continued to run the ranch with efficiency and care, but he made sure to carve out time every day to spend with his wife and daughter. On a warm June evening, almost exactly a year after Rose's birth had been announced, Jackson and Zelda sat on the porch watching Rose toddle around the yard under the watchful eye of one of the ranch hands. She was walking now, or more accurately stumbling with great enthusiasm, and her giggles echoed across the property. "Can you believe it has been almost 2 years since I first saw you run that race?" Jackson asked, his hand finding Zelda's and lacing their fingers together. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago," Zelda said. "And sometimes it feels like yesterday. I was so lost back then, so desperate and afraid. I thought I was running for my freedom, but really I was running toward my future, toward you and this ranch and Rose and everything we have built together." "You know what I think," Jackson said. "I think you won more than your freedom that day. You won your life back. You won the chance to be happy, to be loved, to be everything you were meant to be, and I am so grateful that you chose to share that life with me." "I will always choose you," Zelda said. "When I won that race, you asked me to run home with you instead of just running away. Best decision I ever made." Jackson pulled her close and kissed her, and Rose shrieked with delight from the yard, clapping her chubby hands together. They broke apart laughing, and Jackson went to scoop up his daughter, tossing her gently in the air until she was breathless with giggles. Zelda watched her husband and daughter playing together as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. She thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago, broken and desperate and convinced her life was over. That woman would never have believed this was possible, that she could be this happy, this loved, this complete, but she had run anyway. She had run with everything she had, not knowing where she would end up, but determined to fight for something better. And she had found it, not at the finish line, but in the man who had asked her to run toward a future instead of away from a past. The next few years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. Rose grew from a toddler into a bright, energetic child who followed her father around the ranch whenever possible, asking endless questions about the horses and cattle and everything else. Jackson was patient with her, teaching her about the animals and the land with the same care his own father had shown him. In the spring of 1877, Zelda gave birth to their second child, a son they named Henry after Jackson's father. Henry was calmer than his sister, content to observe the world with solemn, dark eyes that reminded Zelda of her own father. Rose was initially skeptical of the small intruder who took up so much of her mother's attention, but she warmed to him quickly and appointed herself his protector and teacher. The ranch continued to prosper under Jackson's management. They expanded their herd, added more grazing land, and hired additional hands to manage the increased workload. Zelda managed the household with growing confidence, her reputation as a cook and hostess spreading throughout the county. They hosted barn dances and holiday parties, opened their home to neighbors in need, and became pillars of the community. In 1879, another daughter arrived, a fiery redhead they named Clara, who seemed determined to make her presence known from the moment she was born. With 3 children under the age of 6, life was chaotic and exhausting, but Zelda would not have changed a moment of it. Jackson was an incredible father, patient and loving, and always willing to help with the endless demands of parenthood. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jackson surprised Zelda with a gift, a beautiful bay mare he had been training specifically for her. "You have not been running anywhere in years," he said as he led the horse out of the barn. "But I thought maybe you would like to ride. Her name is Freedom, and she is yours." Zelda was speechless, running her hands over the mare's soft nose. "She is beautiful. Not as beautiful as you," Jackson said, "but close. I want you to have something that is just yours, something that reminds you of how strong and brave you are. You ran for your freedom once, and now you can ride for your joy." They went riding together every Sunday after that, sometimes just the two of them and sometimes with the children as they grew old enough to manage their own ponies. Those rides became some of Zelda's favorite times, the chance to gallop across the open prairie with the wind in her hair and the knowledge that she was choosing this life, choosing this happiness, every single day. The children grew rapidly, as children do. Rose developed a love for horses that rivaled her father's, spending hours in the barn grooming and talking to them. Henry showed an aptitude for numbers and organization, helping his mother with the household accounts by the time he was 8. Clara was the adventurous one, always climbing too high and exploring too far, giving her parents heart attacks on a regular basis. In 1883, Zelda gave birth to their fourth and final child, another son they named Samuel. Samuel was a quiet, thoughtful boy who preferred books to horses, and could usually be found curled up somewhere with whatever reading material he could find. Jackson built him a small bookshelf in the house and made sure to bring back new books whenever he went to town. As the children grew and the ranch prospered, Jackson and Zelda grew even closer. They had learned to work together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs and supporting each other through challenges. They still made time for those Sunday picnics by the creek when they could, stealing a few hours alone to reconnect and remember why they fell in love in the first place. In 1885, on a warm summer evening, they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. It seemed like everyone in the county came, the house and yard filled with friends and neighbors and well-wishers. As Zelda looked around at the celebration, at her 4 healthy children playing with the other kids, at the ranch that had become a true home, at the man she loved more with each passing year, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Later that night, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, Jackson found Zelda on the porch, looking out at the starlit prairie. "Tired?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "A good tired," Zelda said, leaning back against him. 10 years, Jackson. "Can you believe it has been 10 years? Best 10 years of my life," Jackson said. "And I am looking forward to the next 10 and the 10 after that and all the ones that come after." "Do you ever regret it?" Zelda asked, "taking a chance on a desperate woman who had just run a foolish race?" Jackson turned her to face him, his expression serious. "I have never regretted a single moment with you, Zelda Hayes. You are the bravest, strongest, most amazing woman I have ever known. You took your broken pieces and built something beautiful. You made this house a home. You gave me a family I never thought I would have. You gave me love I did not know I deserved. Regret you? Never, not for a single second." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you so much. You saved me that day, you know. Not just by offering me a job, but by seeing something in me worth saving. By believing I could be more than my worst moments." "You saved yourself," Jackson corrected gently. "You ran that race and refused to give up. You took the job and worked harder than anyone I have ever known. You chose to build this life with me instead of running away from everything. I just got lucky enough to be standing in the right place when you needed someone." "Lucky for both of us," Zelda said, and kissed him with all the love and gratitude she felt. They stood there on the porch for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the sounds of the prairie night. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. Around them, the ranch hummed with life and possibility. And above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human drama playing out below but bearing witness to it nonetheless. As the years continued to pass, the Hayes family became an institution in Council Bluffs and the surrounding area. Rose married at 19, a young rancher from the next county over, and gave Jackson and Zelda their first grandchild before their 15th wedding anniversary. Henry took over more and more of the ranch management as Jackson's hair went gray and his joints protested the long days in the saddle. Clara eventually became a teacher, using her natural energy and enthusiasm to educate the children of the growing community. Samuel went east to college and returned with a law degree, setting up practice in Council Bluffs and becoming one of the most respected attorneys in the territory. Through it all, Jackson and Zelda remained the constants, the foundation on which their family was built. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, cattle diseases and market crashes, always finding a way through together. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, danced at weddings and comforted at funerals, always side by side. In 1895, on their 20th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a surprise party at the ranch. 3 generations of Hayes family gathered to celebrate the couple whose love story had become the stuff of local legend. The woman who ran for her freedom, and the cowboy who convinced her to run toward home instead. Jackson gave a speech that night, his voice thick with emotion as he looked around at the assembled crowd. 20 years ago, I watched the bravest thing I have ever seen. A woman who had every reason to give up chose to fight instead. She ran a race she could not win and won it anyway through sheer determination and heart. I fell in love with her that day, and I have fallen deeper in love with her every day since. Zelda, you are my heart, my home, my everything. Thank you for running toward me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for making me the happiest man alive. Zelda could not speak through her tears, so she just stood and kissed him while their family cheered and applauded. When she finally found her voice, she simply said, "Thank you for asking. I would choose you again in a heartbeat." More years passed in the way they do, quickly and slowly all at once. Jackson and Zelda grew old together, their hair going white and their movements slower, but their love as strong as ever. They handed over more and more of the ranch operations to Henry and his wife, content to spend their days watching their grandchildren grow and enjoying the peace they had earned. On a spring morning in 1903, 30 years after that fateful footrace in the town square, Zelda woke in the big bed she had shared with Jackson for 3 decades and realized something felt different. Jackson was still asleep beside her, breathing deep and peaceful, and she took a moment to study his face in the early morning light. 30 years, and she still found him handsome, still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her. "You are staring," Jackson murmured, opening one eye. "I am appreciating," Zelda corrected. 30 years today, can you believe it?" "Best 30 years anyone ever lived," Jackson said, pulling her close. "Want to know a secret? Always. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. As long as it meant I got to spend it with you." Zelda kissed him softly. "Same here. Racing Tillman was terrifying, but it brought me to you. And you, Jackson Hayes, were worth every terrified step." That afternoon, they rode out to the creek together, moving slower than they used to but still capable of getting there. Their children had tried to plan a party, but Jackson and Zelda had insisted on spending the day alone together, just the two of them like so many Sundays before. They spread a blanket and sat together in the shade of the cottonwood trees, older now but still strong. The creek burbled past, unchanged by the decades, a constant in a world that had seen so much change. "You ever miss those early days?" Jackson asked. when it was just us and the ranch and no responsibilities beyond surviving the next season. Zelda thought about it. Sometimes. But I would not trade what we have now for anything. Our children, our grandchildren, the life we have built together. It is more than I ever dreamed of back when I was that desperate woman running for her life. You were never just a desperate woman, Jackson said. You were always extraordinary. I just happened to be paying attention. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, watching the play of light on the water. Finally, Jackson spoke again. I am the luckiest man who ever lived. We are both lucky, Zelda said. I won my freedom in a foot race 30 years ago. But the real prize was everything that came after. You, our family, this life. That is what I really won that day. And I won you, Jackson said. I got to share my life with my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. That is a victory no race could ever match. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors of a prairie sunset, Jackson and Zelda rode back to the ranch together. Their children had defied their wishes and organized a small family dinner, just immediate family, and the house was warm with light and laughter and the smell of good food. That night, surrounded by the family they had built together, Zelda looked at Jackson across the dinner table and smiled. He smiled back, that same smile that had made her heart flip 3 decades earlier, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice all those years ago. She had won her freedom in a foot race, and a cowboy had asked her to run home with him instead. And in choosing to run toward him rather than simply away from her troubles, she had found everything she had ever wanted, and so much more than she had ever imagined. Their love story was not dramatic or tragic. There were no villains to defeat, no impossible obstacles to overcome beyond the ordinary challenges of life on the frontier. But it was real and deep and lasting, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, and the daily choice to love each other even when it was hard. And on that spring evening in 1903, as Jackson raised his glass in a toast to his wife of 30 years and the family they had built together, Zelda thought about that younger version of herself running through the dust with bleeding feet and a desperate heart. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that the race was just the beginning, that the real journey would be longer and harder and infinitely more rewarding than she could ever imagine. But she could not go back, so instead she raised her own glass and looked at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, people who would not exist if she had not chosen to run that day, if she had not chosen to accept Jackson's offer, if she had not chosen love over fear again and again and again. To 30 years, Jackson said, his eyes finding hers across the table. To 30 more, Zelda replied, knowing it was unlikely but hoping anyway. As it turned out, they got 12 more years together, 12 years of watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren arrive, 12 years of sitting on the porch at sunset and riding out to the creek on Sunday afternoons, 12 years of falling asleep in each other's arms and waking up grateful for another day together. Jackson died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1915, Zelda beside him as she had been for 42 years. The funeral was one of the largest Council Bluffs had ever seen, a testament to the man he had been and the life he had lived. Zelda mourned him deeply, the loss carving a hole in her heart that would never completely heal. But she did not regret a single moment they had shared. She had loved him well and been loved well in return, and that was more than most people ever got. She lived 4 more years after Jackson's death, surrounded by the family they had built together, telling stories about the cowboy who had asked a desperate woman to run home with him, and the love they had shared for more than 4 decades. When Zelda died in the spring of 1919, Holding the hand of her daughter Rose, her last words were simple and sure. "I am coming home, Jackson. Wait for me." And in the way of love stories, she was buried beside him on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, their headstones side by side for eternity. The inscription on Zelda's stone reads simply, "She ran for freedom and found love." The inscription on Jackson's read, "He showed her the way home." Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would continue the story they started, running the ranch and raising families of their own, carrying forward the legacy of courage and love and choosing happiness even in the face of hardship. And on quiet Sunday afternoons, when the light hit the creek just right, some of them swore they could see two figures sitting together under the cottonwood trees, hands linked and faces turned toward each other, still choosing love after all the years and miles had passed. The story of Zelda Sutherland and Jackson Hayes became part of the folklore of Council Bluffs, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy, but always capturing the essential truth at its heart. A woman ran for her freedom in a desperate footrace and won against all odds. A cowboy saw something in her worth believing in and offered her not just a job but a chance at a better life. She chose to run toward him instead of simply away from her troubles. And together, they built something lasting and beautiful and true. It was not a complicated story or a dramatic one by the standards of dime novels and tall tales. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it endured long after both of them were gone. Because at its heart, their story was about the most powerful force in the world, the choice to love and be loved, to build rather than destroy, to run toward hope instead of away from fear. And that kind of story never really ends. It just continues, passed down through generations, inspiring others to make the same choice they did, to run toward love when it calls, to build homes where there were none, to choose courage over comfort and partnership over solitude. Zelda won her freedom in a footrace on a hot summer day in 1873. Jackson offered her a home and a future. Together they built a life that lasted decades and impacted countless others. And the love they shared, simple and deep and enduring, remained as a testament to what was possible when two people chose each other and kept choosing each other every day. The Hayes Ranch still stands today, run by descendants of that original couple, still prospering on the rolling prairie of Iowa. And on the wall of the main house, there is a faded photograph of a young woman with determined eyes and a cowboy with a kind smile, taken on their wedding day in October of 1873. Below it, a small plaque tells their story in brief, but those who know always tell the fuller version, the one about bravery and second chances and love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Because some stories are worth remembering, worth telling and retelling until they become part of the landscape itself. And the story of how Zelda Sutherland ran for her freedom and found her home with Jackson Hayes is one of those stories, as much a part of Council Bluffs as the prairie wind and the endless sky, and the promise that tomorrow could always be better than today if you were brave enough to run toward it.